my pleasure to introduce our speaker. And so I'm going to introduce Howard Zehr, widely known as the grandfather of restorative justice. Zehr began as a practitioner and theorist in restorative justice in the late 1970s at the foundational stage of the field. He has led hundreds of events in more than 25 countries and 35 states, including trainings and consultations on restorative justice, victim offender conferencing, judicial reform, and other criminal justice matters. With that, I want a warm applause and welcome to Howard Zehr. And thank you.
I died on November 4, 1995. On that day at 4:40 in the afternoon, Jackie Millar was shot in the head at close range with an exploding bullet. Two boys had broken into her friend's house where she was resting and took her keys and then debated which gun they would use to shoot her. This is Jackie. I died, she told me, with quiet conviction, and then I got resurrected. The Lord told me, maybe you can stop one youth if you tell your story. When I met her, she was legally blind, her right hand was paralyzed, she walked with difficulty, and she spoke slowly. But Jackie was visiting prisons, talking with young men like those who shot her, in fact, talking with the young men who did shoot her, and doing what she called hug therapy. She insisted that Greg, the one that pulled the trigger, was like one of her sons. A longtime prisoner recounts how he transformed his life when she said, "You are a human being and don't you let anybody else tell you differently," and then gave him a hug. These come from a book I did called Transcending Victims of Crime, Transcending Victims of Violent Crime. Jackie was one of those people. Most of us don't experience this call of service quite that dramatically. Many of us might, in fact, be kind of uncomfortable with the idea, the term service. But my sense is that if you're doing the work you're doing, you probably felt some kind of call or some kind of pull. My granddaughter, Jasmine, is only 2 years out of college, her second year out of college. She began last year as a special education teacher with a classroom of kids with very severe handicaps. This year she has a kindergarten class of autistic kids. She never talks about a call, but she loves her work, and she said the other day she'd pay to do this if they didn't pay her. That sounds like a call to me. 25 years ago, I did a book interviewing and photographing men and women in Pennsylvania serving a real-life sentence. Recently, I finally got permission to go back and see how they were doing. This is Dobe, Marilyn Dobe-Berlinski. She's been in prison since 1972, 45 years. She says she's the longest she's served. She's been incarcerated longer than any other woman in Pennsylvania. She's an artist, finds a part of her meaning by painting, but she also raises service dogs. She says, "It gives me a chance to give back to the community. I've been able to see what these dogs do for the people they go to. It's giving back to the community. There is really so little we can do in here to give back to the community. This is one way we can do it, even if it's one dog at a time." This is Yvonne Cloud. She's been in 34 years. When she heard I was coming, she came rushing into the room, and she wanted me to know how much she had changed and how much more she had to say than she did 25 years ago when I talked to her. Since that time, she's become a peer facilitator in drug alcohol programs in prison. She's a certified hospice care worker. She had a long list of things that she's involved in, and she's a certified peer counselor, a peer specialist, spends a lot of time talking with young women who are coming into prison. She said, "Back then I was somewhat shy, still in denial, didn't want nobody to know I had a life sentence, barely wanted to talk about it, but one thing stayed the same. See, back then I determined, to do the wrong things. Now I have the same determination, but to do positive things and give back to people. And that give back to people what was so freely given to me and change their lives for the better. I tell people all the time, I don't have a clue what's going to happen in the future, but I will not stop being positive and doing positive things and helping other people to change their lives. Basically, my motto is, unfortunately, I took a life. Now what I have to do is to help save lives and help people make a difference in their lives. I believe that's what's different for me. Craig Datesman's been in 35 years. He's met with one of his victim's family members and through the Victim Offender Dialogue program that Pennsylvania has. It was transformative for him and I think for the person he had harmed. He said, "You really have to find meaning in life. I realize how important service is, how satisfying it is to be helping other people." And finally, Harry Twiggs. Harry and I had a real deep conversation 25 years ago, and so I was eager to see how he was doing. He, too, is a certified peer specialist. His day is totally full working with young men that are coming into prison. He said, "I should have been dead 1,000 times, but for some reason, God kept me around. I believe we are blessed with 2 lives. The first we live, we make all the mistakes. We commit crimes, we hurt people. But once we come to and wake up and move to our second life, we can draw upon the first life and see our mistakes. Not only can you help yourself, you're able to help other people. I've been in 2 interventions just this morning. I sort of look my being in here as like Nelson Mandela and his compadres at Robben's Island. They came to the conclusion that the solution was within them. So they sat and talked 27 years about how to dismantle apartheid. Harry sees himself as what he calls one of the architects of today's culture of street crime. When he was out a long time ago, 40 years ago, he's been in 46. He has now a calling to address that. Inside prison, stopping one person at a time, and then he dreams of someday being able to do it outside. Many other lifers describe this sense of call. One other example from my book, since you're in the business you are, did this book some years ago called What Will Happen to Me. These are interviewing and photographing children who have parents in prison. We wanted not only to bring more consciousness to them, but we wanted to provide some help to teachers and social workers and grandparents who were caring for these. And so these are some of the children. But these are the grandparents who must have seemed to have found a sense of call to drop their own lives, their plans for retirement and so forth, and raise these kids with great sacrifice. Dorothy Day of Catholic Worker has described the sense of call this way. There's a call to us, a call to service, that we join with others to try to make this better in this world. I've taken the phrase, a call to service, from the title of a book by Dr. Robert Coles. Many of you know his work, Harvard Medical School. He's tried throughout his life, using the method he calls attentive listening, to understand the moral energy that activates his heroes. He notes that a call to service is a call to a new chapter in life. That's certainly how Jackie and how Harry and the others that I've introduced to you see their lives. And I'm guessing that many of you feel some kind of call, even if you don't use that language. I doubt it's the money, in other words, that motivates you to keep doing what you're doing. That call might be vague, as it was for me when I got out of school, but it's important. So the call is important, but it has to be sustainable, and that's my second point. Cole subtitles his book, A Witness to Idealism, but he isn't naive. Idealism too often becomes weariness, and that in turn becomes cynicism. And then that can lead to self-righteousness or despair, and that road ends in depression and burnout. He quotes Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Burnout, he says, King said, is a surrender. We have just so much strength in us. If we give and give, we have less and less and less. And after a while, at a certain point, we're so weak and worn, we hoist up the flag of surrender. We surrender to the worst side of ourselves, and then we display that to others. We surrender to self-pity and to spite and to morose self-preoccupation. If you want to call it depression or burnout, well, okay. If you want to call it the triumph of sin, well, okay. Whatever you say, this is arduous duty, doing this kind of work. To live out one's idealism brings with it hazards. So shrillness and moodiness and humorlessness and tendency to take oneself too seriously, these are signs, perhaps, of an idealism that's in trouble. I often quote American environmental advocate Edward Abbey for some advice he gave to us to help ward off this deterioration of idealism. So here's Abbey. Do not burn yourself out. Be a reluctant enthusiast, a part-time crusader, a half-hearted fanatic. Save the other half of yourselves and your lives for pleasure and adventure. So get out there and breathe deep of that yet sweet and lucid air. Sit quietly for a while and contemplate the precious stillness, the lovely, mysterious space. Enjoy yourself. Keep your brain in your head and your head attached to your body, the body active and alive. And if you do this, I promise you this much. I promise you this one sweet victory over our enemies, over those desk-bound men and women with their hearts in safe deposit boxes and their eyes hypnotized by desk calculators. I promise you this, you will outlive the bastards. Now, I'm not sure that that's adversarial framework's quite the right one, but you get the idea. We need to take care of ourselves, and we need to take care of the organizations we work with to encourage us in that direction. It's important to take time to experience and enjoy life, to remember that the world will go on without us, and we aren't responsible for fixing everything, to take time to just be as well as do. Abby was quite a character, as you may know. I wish I could have included him in another project I did called Pickups, a Love Story. I had a great time interviewing and photographing people with their pickup trucks and hearing the stories of their pickup trucks. Well, it's been my goal in life to be a half-hearted fanatic, and I've tried to teach my students to be half-hearted fanatics. Several of them are here. I should ask them whether they've managed or not. But my first point then is that many of us do experience some kind of call, even if we don't call it that. The second is, it isn't this sense of call or mission isn't enough to sustain us. We need to take care of ourselves and of others, to have a life, you might say. And that brings me to a third point, and that's the importance of a moral vision, some kind of vision to guide us and sustain us. For some of us, it comes from our faith tradition. For others, it comes from other sources. For an increasing number of people, I'm finding it comes from what we've come to call restorative justice. Restorative justice, for many people, has become a kind of moral compass, and it's a vision that can be articulated in either secular terms or religious terms. Many of you know something about restorative justice because many of you your schools have probably adopted a variety of restorative practices that are designed to help reduce conflict, create a more peaceful climate, and so forth. I'm not going to talk about these practices, however, partly because this isn't my educational setting, isn't my area of expertise. I'm going to talk about it a bit more broadly, as a conceptual framework, as a philosophy, as a kind of moral compass or a moral framework. And to me, that's more important than the practices. When I'm confronted with a situation, I don't think first, what are the practices that we might apply? I think, what are the framework? What are the questions we need to ask? So one way to think of restorative justice, and to try to make it simple, I often think of in groups of three. Restorative justice is, first of all, an effort to address harms and the needs that result from the harm. So restorative justice, unlike our legal system, which focuses primarily on who did it and what they deserve, it focuses on those who have been harmed and what they need. The second principle is a principle of obligation. That is, who has the obligation to try to address this harm? So the first principle has to do with harm, the harm and the needs. The second one has to do with responsibility, the obligations, helping people to take responsibility for the harms. And the third has to do with involvement, that is, trying to engage people who have some kind of stake in the situation, in the resolution of it, as much as possible. In other words, restorative justice, and I work primarily in the criminal justice system, but in general, it's a needs-based, relationally oriented understanding of justice. Unlike our legal system, which has so much influenced our disciplinary systems in schools, it's not so focused on making sure people get what they deserve and what punishment they deserve. Rather, it focuses on the needs that people have, the obligations to address those needs, and how to engage them in the process. That leads me to then there are many values that underlie this, but I like to think of three values. Again, the number 3 is easy to remember. And they all start with R in English, which is also helpful for me. One of them is respect. I really think what we're talking about here is respect. When I talk to offenders, often that's what they're trying to get out of the offenses they create. and then that's what they don't experience in the justice system. When I talk to victims, so often that's what they are looking for, and I could say a lot more about that, some experience of respect. I think that what we're talking about here is respect, essentially. Secondly is the principle of responsibility. We live in a society that's so focused on rights and individual rights. Restorative justice reminds us that we have responsibilities. And that's based in the third value, and that is the value of relationships. We live in a very individualistic, again, rights-based culture that focuses on the individual and their rights. Restorative justice reminds us that we live in a web of relationships, and what we do affects that web, and when it's negative, we have obligations for it. So, respect, responsibility, relationship. For me, it's grounded in another vision, and you can articulate in your own words, but it's a desire to live in right relationships with one another, with each other, with the creation, and for me, the Creator. But the overall goal then is to heal, to make right. I ran across recently a Native American court called a wellness court, and the whole focus of the court is how do we heal the wrongs that have happened, the harms that have happened, and the individuals involved, both those who caused the harm and those who experienced the harm. So increasingly for many people, and for me, restorative justice is not just about crime, or not just about school discipline, or not just about dressing wrong. It's a way of approaching life and our life together. It's about taking our work home with us. It's why I'm so energized when so many people tell me how restorative justice has impacted their lives. And I find it wasn't because they went through some practice, although that's inspiring when I hear it, but just because it's given them a new compass. When life-sentenced women in Pennsylvania tell me they are keeping each other accountable with the question, is that the RJ way? Then I realized that restorative justice is much more than a technique. It took me a long time to get this. For a long time, I couldn't get it through my head. We started this as a way to address crime. What are you talking about when you say it's a way of life? Finally, it got through to me. It's about values. The criminal justice system and often our punishment systems in school teach values, but they aren't necessarily the values that we want really taught, that when someone harms you, you harm them back and so forth. Rather, it provides another set of values that we want to live by. Based on this, I one time wrote up 10 ways to live restoratively. I don't expect you to have to read this. This is a paperless conference, so it's on this little thing that one of the students made last year is on the web with the conference material, I think. So if you want to find it, you can look for it. But let me just read through some of these. First one, take relationships seriously, recognizing you are one of a web of people, institutions, and the environment. 2, be aware of the impact of your actions on others and the world around you. 3, take responsibility for injuries you have caused. Acknowledge, try to repair them. 4, treat everyone with respect, including those who offend you. Good reminder first, in this era I think we're in. 5th, whenever possible, involve people in the decisions that affect them. 6, and I'm sure this is one you hear often, view the conflicts in your life as opportunities. 7, listen to others deeply and compassionately. Try to understand even when you disagree. 8, engage in dialogue with others even when that's difficult, and remain open to learning from them. 9, be cautious about imposing what you think is true, your truth, and views on other people and situations. And finally, sensitively confront everyday injustices such as sexism, racism, and classism. That's my attempt to articulate that. You may have your own way of doing it, but I think thinking about it can be a worthwhile undertaking. So I've argued that most of us have experienced some kind of call, that idealism isn't enough. We have to take care of ourselves and each other. And we will be sustained in the long term better if we have some kind of clear moral compass. Restorative justice, I've suggested, is one way to do that. I'm not suggesting it's the only way to do it. My final point is this. I suggest that we view our calls, our lives, with the eyes of an artist. This brings me back to another book I picked up in a used bookstore. One of my primary research methods over the years has been random random books I found in used bookstores. And that's one of the sad things about the demise of used bookstores due to the web is it can't do that so easily. But some of the real gems that I've found that have really influenced my life were just apparently random. Stephen Myers, in a book called On Seeing Nature, talks about the art of seeing, but it applies equally to the art of living and the art of serving. Myers reminds us that he says, quote, one's knowledge must never overcome one's awe, A-W-E. One's knowledge must never overcome one's awe. As long as there is awe, he says, there is seeing. And then he continues, seeing is a process, partly, of replacing our arrogance with humility. When we respect the reality which fills the abyss of our ignorance, we begin to see. Let me read that again, but rephrasing it. Living fully, serving justly is a process, partly, of replacing our arrogance with humility. When we respect the reality that fills the abyss of our ignorance, only then do we begin to work toward a full and peaceful life. Seeing begins with respect, he says, but wonder is the fuel which sustains vision. I often talk about wonder. When I was in one of my early college courses in philosophy, we walked in the room the first day, and the professor said, he looked around the room, you're all Westerners, so your education has been shaped by the philosophy of Descartes, philosopher Descartes. Remember Descartes? Descartes' method was skepticism. He was not going to believe anything except that could not be doubted. So he comes up finally with, I think, therefore I am. Well, that attitude, my professor said, that attitude of skepticism is what dominates our educational system, our legal system, and so forth. He says, that's not what we're going to do in this class. We are going to start in wonder. And it was a wonderful class. Someone later gave me a book by James Douglas Duncan that defined wonder. It said, wonder is unknowing, experienced as pleasure. Wonder is unknowing, experienced as pleasure. So seeing begins with respect, says Myers, but wonder is the fuel that sustains vision. Myers goes on to outline some key components of it, what he calls the aesthetic vision, the artistic vision, that he says can help keep this wonder alive. And they could well have been written for the justice worker or the educational worker. Here are a few of them. He recommends that we choose specific problems to work on, that is, limit the possibilities, don't try to do everything. Second, find pleasure in the process as well as the product. That one's always a challenge for me. Third, relax our conscious effort and let the unconscious have its place, including our intuition. And finally, accept accidental and unexpected experiences. Certainly, unexpected experiences have been prominent in my work and my experience in the restorative justice field. Finally, Myers talks about mystery and ambiguity. The presence of ambiguity allows visual representations of nature to create a broader range of responses in a viewer than a careful and obvious articulation of details. In other words, he's calling for the power of mystery and ambiguity. Mystery and ambiguity are crucial for your work in education, I'm sure, as they are for restorative justice work and for the artist. That is a geode, slice of a geode, I think from Brazil, that an artist friend of mine had, and I photographed it. So mystery and ambiguity, along with respect, allows space for the unexpected and for differing visions and perceptions to be expressed. Anybody know what that is? My daughter and I last year, my daughter's an artist, and we did a show together called The Secret Life of Typewriters. In her artist statement, she said no working typewriters have been harmed by this. But she worked with ink and paper and pen, and so I worked with photography, and that's the typewriter part. In a class years ago, spiritual director Pat Kaler said something I've never forgotten. She said, growth depends on openness to mystery. We are called to openness, and sin is closing ourselves from mystery. Humility, respect, awe, wonder, these are key words, I think, not just for the artist, but for those of us who do what you do and what I do. If we stay rooted in them, I think we can ward off the wolves of despair, and we'll be able to heed the call of service. Basic to all, perhaps, is an appreciation of the profound mystery of the human spirit. Another book I discovered in a bookstore, Chet Ramo, Honey from Stone, A Naturalist's Search for God, comes to the same conclusion. He says, description is revelation, seeing is praise, and knowledge is an island surrounded by a sea of mystery. Knowledge is an island surrounded by a sea of mystery. My challenge in this work, perhaps it's yours, is not so much to build dikes that we can reclaim land and enlarge the island of knowledge. My challenge, and perhaps it's yours, is to learn how to float, and how to float comfortably in a vast sea of mystery. A sea of mystery that can only be approached in an attitude of wonder and respect. Thank you.